Welcome, traveler of time, to tonight's gentle descent into the quiet corners of history. Whether you're resting after a long day or simply seeking a moment of calm, I'm grateful to have you here. Do let me know where you're listening from and what hour it is for you. I imagine us as glowing dots on a spinning globe, connected by curiosity and the hush of night. And if this peaceful storytelling brings a little stillness to your day, feel free to subscribe. We'll have many more historical tales to share. In this world, every action carried weight beyond its immediate purpose. The way you put on your shoes, the direction you faced while praying, even how you stirred your morning porridge, all of these mundane activities were laden with supernatural significance. Medieval people lived in a universe where God and the adversary waged eternal war, where angels and malevolent spirits walked among mortals, and where the natural world itself was alive with mystical properties. Consider Elizabeth, a baker's wife in a small English village, circa 1347. As she rises before dawn to help her husband prepare the day's bread, her actions follow a careful choreography passed down through generations. She crosses herself 3 times before touching the flour, whispers a prayer to Saint Honorius, the patron saint of bakers, and carefully avoids looking at the dough while it rises. For everyone knows that a woman's direct gaze during her monthly courses could cause the bread to fall flat and refuse to rise properly. Elizabeth's morning routine might seem quaint to us, but in her world, these weren't mere customs. They were matters of survival. A failed batch of bread could mean the difference between profit and poverty, between feeding her family and watching them go hungry. In an age where understanding of natural processes was limited, supernatural explanations filled the gaps, providing both comfort and terror in equal measure. The medieval mind operated on the principle that everything in creation was connected by invisible threads of influence. The movement of celestial bodies affected earthly events. The behavior of animals predicted weather and disaster. Plants growing in certain patterns revealed hidden truths about the future. Even the human body was a microcosm of the universe, with each part corresponding to planetary influences and divine will. Take the humble act of sneezing, something we barely notice today. In medieval times, a sneeze was a moment of profound spiritual vulnerability. The sudden violent expulsion of air from the body was believed to temporarily separate the soul from its earthly vessel, creating a dangerous opening for malevolent spirits to enter. This is why people immediately said, "God bless you," not as a polite courtesy, but as an urgent spiritual protection, a verbal shield thrown up against supernatural invasion. The direction of the sneeze mattered too. A sneeze to the right was considered fortunate, suggesting divine approval. A sneeze to the left warned of impending misfortune. 3 sneezes in a row meant someone was speaking ill of you, while a sneeze at the dinner table foretold the arrival of unexpected guests before the meal was finished. But sneezing was just the beginning. Medieval people lived surrounded by omens and portents that required constant interpretation. The way smoke rose from a chimney could predict the weather for the coming week. Straight ascending smoke meant fair skies, while smoke that curled and twisted warned of storms. Smoke that refused to rise at all suggested that malevolent magic was at work, perhaps a neighbor casting harmful spells. Animals, too, were viewed as messengers from the spiritual realm. Dogs howling at night didn't simply indicate their discomfort. They were announcing the presence of death itself, either approaching the household or already walking among the living as a restless spirit. Cats, those mysterious creatures who moved silently through shadows, were particularly suspect. A black cat crossing your path wasn't merely bad luck. It was a clear sign that dark forces were taking an interest in your affairs. Ravens and crows held special significance as creatures that dwelt on the boundary between life and death. Their harsh cries were believed to be the voices of the damned, warning the living of approaching doom. When these birds gathered in unusual numbers, entire villages would prepare for plague, war, or famine. The sight of a single raven perched on a church steeple was so ominous that some parishes would ring the bells to drive it away, fearing that its presence would call down divine wrath upon the congregation. Even the behavior of domestic animals carried supernatural weight. If a horse refused to pass a certain spot on the road, it wasn't mere stubbornness. The animal, sensing the presence of ghosts or malevolent forces invisible to human eyes. Wise travelers would heed such warnings, finding alternate routes rather than risk encountering whatever evil spirits had claimed that particular patch of earth. The medieval calendar itself was a complex web of auspicious and inauspicious days. Some dates were considered so unlucky that important activities were forbidden entirely. January 1st, March 28th, April 10th, August 1st, and December 6th were known as Egyptian days periods when the veil between worlds grew thin and supernatural forces gained unusual power. No physician would perform surgery on these days. No farmer would plant crops, and no merchant would begin a new venture. Even getting married during an Egyptian day was believed to doom the union to misery and early death. The phases of the moon governed a surprising array of human activities. Haircut during a waxing moon would grow back thick and lustrous, while haircut during the waning moon would grow slowly and might even fall out entirely. Pregnant women took special care to track lunar cycles, believing that children born during a full moon would be blessed with strength and intelligence, while those born during a new moon might be afflicted with madness or deformity. Childbirth itself was surrounded by countless superstitions designed to protect both mother and child during their most vulnerable time. Iron objects were placed around the birthing bed to ward off fairies, who might steal the newborn and leave a changeling in its place. Salt was scattered on the threshold to prevent malevolent forces from entering the room. The mother's wedding ring was placed on her thumb during labor, symbolically ensuring that the child would be born into a blessed union. The moment of birth brought its own set of supernatural considerations. A child born with a caul, a membrane covering the face, was destined for greatness, but also marked for supernatural attention throughout life. Such children were believed to possess the gift of second sight, able to see ghosts and predict the future. The caul itself was carefully preserved and often sold to sailors who believed it would protect them from drowning. The day of the week on which a child was born determined their fundamental character and fate. The old rhyme captured these beliefs. Monday's child is fair of face. Tuesday's child is full of grace. Wednesday's child is full of woe. Thursday's child has far to go. Friday's child is loving and giving. Saturday's child works hard for a living. But the child born on the Sabbath day is bonny and blithe and good and gay. Parents would plan conception carefully, hoping to ensure their children were born on favorable days. Names, too, carried supernatural power. A child named after a saint gained that holy figure's protection throughout life, but also inherited their particular temptations and trials. Parents studied saints' lives carefully before choosing names, weighing the benefits of divine protection against the risks of sharing a saint's suffering. Names of malevolent figures or biblical villains were absolutely forbidden, as they might invite harmful influences into the child's life. The medieval church both encouraged and attempted to control these beliefs, walking a careful line between condemning pagan superstitions and acknowledging the spiritual realities that ordinary people experience daily. Church bells weren't just calls to worship. They were powerful weapons against evil spirits. The sound of consecrated bronze was believed to shatter harmful influence and drive away malevolent forces. During thunderstorms, church bells would ring continuously, their sacred tones battling against the supernatural chaos of the tempest. Holy water became a multi-purpose spiritual tool, sprinkled not just on people, but on crops, livestock, and homes to provide divine protection. Farmers would carry vials of blessed water to their fields, sprinkling it on seeds to ensure good harvests and ward off blight. Merchants would sprinkle it on their goods to prevent theft and ensure fair profits. Even soldiers carried holy water into battle, believing it would turn aside enemy blades and arrows. The proliferation of saints in medieval Christianity partly reflected this need for supernatural protection in every aspect of life. There was a patron saint for virtually every profession, ailment, and concern. Saint Anthony protected against fire and plague. Saint Christopher guarded travelers. Saint Apollonia eased toothaches. Saint Agatha protected against lightning and volcanic eruptions. Saint Blaise cured throat ailments. The list went on, creating a vast celestial bureaucracy of specialized divine helpers. Relics, physical remains, or belongings of saints were considered to possess concentrated supernatural power. A splinter of wood from the true cross, a fragment of St. Peter's bone, a thread from the Virgin Mary's robe. These items were worth more than gold and were believed capable of working miracles. Towns and monasteries competed fiercely to acquire powerful relics, knowing they would attract pilgrims and provide spiritual protection for the entire community. The authentication of relics became a complex process involving church officials. But the demand was so great that forgeries flourished. Medieval Europe contained enough splinters of the true cross to build several complete crosses, and enough milk teeth of the infant Jesus to fill a small bag. Yet people's faith in these objects remained unshaken, perhaps because the spiritual comfort they provided was very real regardless of their physical authenticity. Pilgrimages to holy sites were partly devotional journeys and partly supernatural quests for healing and protection. The road to Santiago de Compostela in Spain, where the Apostle James was buried, was believed to offer spiritual purification to all who completed the arduous journey. Canterbury Cathedral, site of Thomas Becket's martyrdom, drew crowds seeking miraculous healing. Rome itself was a vast repository of sacred power, where every church contained relics and every street corner had witnessed divine intervention. But supernatural beliefs extended far beyond official church doctrine into realms that made clergy deeply uncomfortable. Folk magic thrived alongside Christianity, offering practical solutions to everyday problems through rituals that blended prayer with practices that bordered on forbidden arts. Village wise women knew which herbs to gather under specific moon phases for maximum potency. They could predict the weather by observing the behavior of spiders, cure warts by rubbing them with stolen coins, and protect crops from hail by burying blessed candles at the four corners of fields. Love magic was particularly popular, though officially forbidden by the church. Young women would perform elaborate rituals to attract desired suitors or test the faithfulness of current lovers. Eating an apple while gazing into a mirror at midnight on Halloween would reveal the face of one's future husband. Placing bay leaves under one's pillow on St. Anne's Eve would bring prophetic dreams of marriage. Carrying a mandrake root, a plant believed to grow beneath gallows where innocent men had been hanged, would ensure irresistible attractiveness to the opposite sex. The mandrake itself exemplified the strange intersection of botany and supernatural belief in medieval minds. This plant, with its vaguely human-shaped root, was thought to scream when pulled from the earth, and anyone who heard that scream would perish instantly. The solution was to tie a rope around the root and attach the other end to a dog, then frighten the dog into running away and pulling up the plant. The dog would perish from hearing the mandrake scream, but the human harvester would survive to claim the valuable root. Weather prediction was another area where supernatural beliefs flourished. Professional weather prophets claimed to read signs in everything from the color of sunset clouds to the thickness of onion skins. A red sky at night meant fair weather ahead, because it showed divine pleasure with human behavior that day. A red sky in the morning warned of divine anger and approaching storms. Unusual cloud formations were interpreted as heavenly armies preparing for spiritual warfare, with earthly weather as a side effect of celestial battles. The behavior of farm animals provided additional weather clues. Cows lying down in the pasture meant rain was coming within hours. They were seeking dry spots before the storm hit. Pigs gathering sticks and building nests indicated a harsh winter ahead. Chickens refusing to venture far from the coop warned of severe weather within days. Even insects were consulted. Spiders spinning larger webs predicted rain, while ants building higher hills foretold flooding. Seasonal celebrations were elaborate attempts to maintain harmony between human communities and the supernatural forces that governed natural cycles. Christmas wasn't just about celebrating Christ's birth. It was a crucial time for ensuring the sun's return after the longest night of the year. Candles burned in every window to call back the light, while evergreen decorations symbolized life's persistence through winter's death. The Yule log, carefully selected and blessed, would burn for 12 days, its flames holding back the forces of darkness that grew strongest. During the winter solstice, Easter celebrations combined Christian resurrection themes with older beliefs about spring's return and the earth's renewal. Eggs, symbols of new life, were decorated and blessed, then eaten to absorb their life-giving properties. The Easter fire, kindled from flint and steel rather than existing flames, represented the pure light of Christ conquering death. Water blessed at Easter was considered especially powerful, capable of healing the sick and protecting crops throughout the growing season. May Day festivities acknowledged the dangerous beauty of spring's full arrival, when supernatural forces were believed to be at their most active. Young people would venture into forests before dawn to gather flowers and branches. But they also risked encounters with fairies, elves, and other woodland spirits who might bless or curse them depending on their behavior. The maypole itself was a sacred tree, its ribbons representing the connections between earth and sky, human and divine, natural and supernatural. Harvest festivals weren't just celebrations of successful crops. They were elaborate Thanksgiving rituals designed to maintain divine favor for the coming year. The last sheaf of grain was often shaped into a corn dolly, a figure representing the spirit of the harvest that would be kept through winter and returned to the fields at planting time. First fruits were always offered to God and the saints before humans could partake, ensuring continued supernatural protection for future crops. The medieval understanding of the human body was deeply influenced by supernatural beliefs that would seem bizarre to modern medical practitioners. The four humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile weren't just biological fluids, but spiritual essences that connected humans to cosmic forces. Blood was associated with air and spring, representing hope and vitality. Phlegm connected to water and winter, bringing calm and reflection. Yellow bile linked to fire and summer, generating energy and ambition. Black bile tied to earth and autumn, causing melancholy and introspection. Illness wasn't simply physical malfunction, but spiritual imbalance that could be caused by sin, harmful influence, or cosmic misalignment. Treatment required addressing supernatural as well as physical causes. Physicians would consult astrological charts to determine the best times for bloodletting or surgery, believing that planetary positions affected the success of medical procedures. Mercury governed communication and travel, so ailments of the mouth and legs were best treated when Mercury was favorably positioned. Venus ruled love and beauty, making it the ideal time to treat skin conditions and reproductive disorders. The practice of bloodletting itself was based on supernatural as well as medical theory. Removing excess blood wasn't just about balancing the humors. It was about releasing spiritual corruption that had entered the body through sin or harmful influence. The blood was carefully examined after extraction, with its color, consistency, and smell providing clues about the spiritual state of the patient's soul. Dreams were considered direct communications from the supernatural realm, requiring careful interpretation by those skilled in divine symbolism. Dreaming of clear water meant spiritual purification and good fortune ahead. Muddy or turbulent water warned of spiritual contamination and approaching troubles. Dreams of flying indicated the soul's temporary liberation from earthly constraints, often preceding spiritual revelations or prophetic visions. Animals in dreams carried specific meanings that have been codified through centuries of spiritual tradition. Dreaming of white horses meant divine messages were coming, while black horses warned of harmful temptation. Sheep represented innocence and divine protection, while wolves symbolized spiritual predators seeking to destroy the soul. Birds in dreams often carried messages from deceased loved ones or warnings from guardian angels. The interpretation of dreams became a specialized skill, with some individuals gaining reputations as divine interpreters whose services were sought by everyone from peasants to nobility. These dream readers would consider not just the symbols that appeared, but also the dreamer's spiritual state, recent behavior, and position in the lunar cycle. A dream that might be positive for a virtuous person could be ominous for someone living in wrongdoing. Death itself was surrounded by elaborate supernatural beliefs designed to ease the dying person's transition to the afterlife and protect the living from spiritual contamination. The moment of death was considered extremely dangerous, as the departing soul was vulnerable to harmful interception, while evil spirits might attempt to enter the vacated body. Candles were kept burning around the deathbed to provide spiritual illumination, while blessed salt was scattered on the threshold to prevent malevolent forces from entering the room. The behavior of animals around the dying was carefully observed for supernatural significance. If a dog howled while someone was dying, it meant the person's soul was being contested between angels and darker forces. Cats leaving the house during someone's final illness suggested that evil spirits were already claiming victory. Birds tapping at windows were thought to be souls of the already dead, coming to escort the dying person to the afterlife. The treatment of the body after death required careful attention to supernatural considerations. The corpse was positioned with feet toward the door, symbolically ready for the soul's journey to heaven. Coins were placed on the eyes, not just to keep them closed, but to pay the spiritual toll for crossing into the afterlife. Mirrors in the house were covered to prevent the soul from becoming trapped in reflections, while clocks were stopped to mark the exact moment when earthly time ended for the deceased. The 3 days between death and burial were considered especially perilous, as the soul was believed to linger near the body before making its final journey. Family members would maintain constant vigil, praying continuously and watching for signs of supernatural activity. Strange sounds, unexplained lights, or sudden temperature changes were interpreted as evidence of spiritual warfare over the deceased person's eternal fate. Funeral processions followed routes carefully chosen to avoid crossroads, where evil spirits were believed to congregate. The church bells were tolled continuously during the journey, their sacred sound clearing the path of harmful interference. Holy water was sprinkled liberally on the coffin and grave, while blessed herbs were scattered to purify the burial site and protect it from desecration by supernatural forces. The positioning of graves within the churchyard reflected beliefs about spiritual hierarchy and supernatural protection. Burial close to the church building itself was reserved for the most virtuous members of the community, as proximity to consecrated ground provided maximum protection from harmful interference. Those who had taken their own lives and suspected practitioners of forbidden arts were buried in unconsecrated ground outside the churchyard walls, where their potentially corrupted souls couldn't contaminate the blessed earth or influence other graves. As we near the end of our journey through this landscape of medieval superstitions, it's worth reflecting on what these beliefs meant to the people who held them. In our modern world, with its scientific explanations and technological solutions, it's easy to dismiss these practices as ignorant or primitive. But for medieval people, these superstitions provided something the pure reason cannot: comfort in the face of uncertainty, meaning in the midst of suffering, and hope when natural explanations offered none. The medieval world was a dangerous place where death could strike without warning, where crops could fail despite careful tending, where loved ones could sicken and perish despite desperate care. In such a world, supernatural explanations weren't luxuries, but necessities, ways of making sense of chaos and maintaining hope when reason alone proved insufficient. These beliefs also created communities, bound together by shared understanding of cosmic order and mutual responsibility for maintaining spiritual health. When the entire village participated in blessing the fields or protecting against harmful forces, individual suffering became collective concern, and personal faith became community strength. Perhaps most importantly, these superstitions acknowledge the mystery and wonder that surround human existence. Medieval people lived in a universe alive with meaning, where every action mattered and every moment held potential for divine encounter. Their world was frightening, but never meaningless. Dangerous, but never empty of hope. As you drift off to sleep tonight, surrounded by the safety and comfort of the modern world, perhaps you can find something valuable in the medieval experience. Not the fear or the restrictions, but the sense of living in a universe where everything is connected, where mystery remains possible, and where hope persists even in the darkest times. The next time you see a shooting star or hear an owl calling in the night, the next time you feel a sudden chill or notice an unusual cloud formation, remember our medieval ancestors who saw in such moments not just natural phenomena, but glimpses of the sacred breaking through into ordinary time. Perhaps in our rush to explain everything, we've lost something they possessed: the ability to be amazed, to remain open to wonder, to live with mystery rather than demanding that every question have a simple answer. Sweet dreams, dear listener, and may your rest be peaceful and your dreams filled with the gentle magic that our ancestors knew was always just beyond the veil of ordinary sight. Yet, for all the grand ceremonies and sacred rituals, the medieval world was also governed by beliefs that would seem utterly peculiar to our modern minds. The line between the sacred and the superstitious was often impossibly thin, creating a tapestry of practices that shaped every aspect of daily existence. Consider the medieval belief in the power of sympathetic magic, where like was thought to influence like. A red stone might be used to treat bleeding, while yellow herbs were prescribed for jaundice. The doctrine of signatures suggested that the divine had marked every plant and mineral with signs indicating their proper use. A walnut, resembling a brain, was naturally suited to treating head ailments. Lungwort, with its spotted leaves that looked like diseased lungs, was the obvious remedy for respiratory troubles. These weren't merely folk remedies practiced in shadowy corners. The most learned physicians of the age, trained in the great universities of Paris and Bologna, prescribed treatments based on these principles. The human body was understood as a microcosm of the universe itself, governed by the same forces that moved the stars and changed the seasons. The medieval marketplace was a complex battlefield of supernatural forces, where buyers and sellers engaged in elaborate rituals designed to ensure fair transactions and protect against cursed or contaminated goods. Vendors would often display protective symbols at their stalls and burn specific incenses to ward off evil influences. Buyers, in turn, would examine their purchases not only for physical quality, but for signs of supernatural contamination. Certain vendors were known to specialize in spiritually pure foods, commanding premium prices for goods that had been prepared according to strict supernatural protocols. A merchant selling blessed bread, for instance, would have followed elaborate rituals during every stage of preparation, from the grinding of the grain to the final baking. Such bread was believed to offer protection against illness and misfortune, making it worth far more than ordinary loaves. The treatment of water carried profound, supernatural implications that extended to all aspects of cooking and food preparation. Water drawn from certain wells or springs was believed to possess healing properties or protective powers, while water collected during specific lunar phases was thought to be especially potent for brewing and cooking. Many cooks would bless their water before using it in food preparation, making the sign of the cross over buckets and barrels to ensure the liquid was spiritually pure. During times of plague or illness, families would seek out water from holy wells or springs associated with particular saints, believing that food prepared with such blessed water would protect them from disease and malevolent influences. Some wells became famous throughout entire regions for their miraculous waters, and pilgrims would travel great distances to fill their vessels from these sacred sources. The medieval understanding of fire elevated the simple act of food preparation to a sacred ritual. The hearth was considered the spiritual heart of the home, and the fire that burned there was thought to be a conduit between the earthly and divine realms. Medieval cooks would carefully tend their fires, ensuring they never completely died out, as an extinguished hearth fire was believed to invite evil spirits into the home. Special woods were burned during the preparation of important meals: holly for protection, oak for strength, and birch for purification. The smoke from these sacred fires was thought to carry prayers and protective energies throughout the household. Some families would add specific herbs to their cooking fires, believing that the aromatic smoke would not only flavor their food, but also create an invisible shield of protection around their home. Even the humble act of stirring food was imbued with supernatural significance. Medieval cooks understood that the direction of stirring could influence the spiritual properties of their dishes. Stirring clockwise, following the path of the sun, was believed to invoke positive energies and blessings, while stirring counterclockwise was thought to attract negative influences or even curses. Many recipes included specific instructions for stirring patterns, and experienced cooks would often incorporate protective prayers or incantations into their stirring rituals, believing that the circular motion would bind positive energies into their food. The medieval kitchen was also a repository of protective charms and talismans designed to safeguard both the cooking process and those who consumed the resulting meals. Bundles of protective herbs hung from rafters, iron horseshoes nailed above doorways, and small religious icons placed near cooking fires all served to create a network of supernatural protection. Many cooks wore specific amulets while preparing food, believing these personal talismans would prevent them from accidentally introducing negative energies into their cooking. The kitchen knife, that essential tool of food preparation, was often blessed and treated with special reverence, as it was believed that a cursed or contaminated blade could transmit malevolent influences to any food it touched. Some families would have their knives blessed annually by a priest, while others would perform their own purification rituals, passing the blades through sacred smoke or washing them with holy water. The medieval understanding of leftovers and food waste carried significant supernatural implications. Discarding food was considered not only wasteful, but potentially dangerous, as discarded food could be used by enemies to create curses or harmful magic. Many households had elaborate rituals for disposing of food scraps, often burying them in specific locations or burning them with protective herbs to prevent their misuse. Some families would feed their leftovers to animals or give them to the poor, believing that such acts of charity would generate positive spiritual energy that would protect their household. This practice served a dual purpose, combining practical compassion with supernatural self-interest in a way that was entirely consistent with the medieval worldview. The changing of seasons brought its own set of culinary superstitions and practices. As autumn approached and the harvest began, families would prepare for the long winter months ahead with rituals designed to ensure their food stores remain protected and abundant. Root cellars would be blessed with holy water, and protective herbs would be scattered among stored vegetables. Some families would place small religious medallions or fragments of blessed bread in their storage areas, believing these sacred objects would maintain a protective presence over their food. Throughout the winter, the first frost of the year was considered a particularly significant moment, marking the boundary between the growing season and the dormant winter months. On the night of the first frost, many families would perform special rituals to protect their remaining crops and stored food. Candles would be lit in windows, prayers would be recited, and protective symbols would be drawn on barn doors and storage buildings. Winter itself was understood as a time of spiritual testing, when the forces of darkness grew stronger and the need for supernatural protection became more urgent. The winter solstice, the longest night of the year, was both feared and celebrated. Families would gather to keep vigil through the dark hours, maintaining fires and lights to symbolically assist the sun in its battle against darkness. Special foods prepared for solstice celebrations were believed to carry concentrated spiritual energy that would sustain the household through the remaining winter months. The preparation of these solstice foods followed elaborate protocols that had been passed down through countless generations. Certain ingredients could only be gathered at specific times and in specific ways. Herbs picked at midnight under a full moon, water drawn from a sacred spring at dawn, grain blessed by a priest on a holy day. Each component carried its own spiritual significance, and their combination in solstice dishes created foods that were believed to possess almost miraculous properties. As winter gradually gave way to spring, new rituals emerged to welcome the return of warmth and life. The first herbs of spring were gathered with prayers of thanksgiving, and the first meals prepared with fresh ingredients were treated as sacred occasions. Families would invite neighbors to share these first spring meals, believing that communal celebration would strengthen the protective spiritual bonds that held their community together. The medieval understanding of hospitality was deeply intertwined with supernatural beliefs. Welcoming strangers and sharing food with travelers was not merely a social custom, but a spiritual obligation with profound implications. Many medieval tales told of angels or saints who had appeared as humble travelers, testing the charity and faith of those they encountered. The possibility that any stranger might be a divine messenger in disguise meant that hospitality was always tinged with religious significance. Guests were offered the best food available, not merely out of courtesy, but because proper hospitality was believed to generate protective spiritual energy for both host and visitor. The sharing of bread and salt with strangers was considered a binding ritual that created mutual obligations of protection and peaceful intent. Many households maintained special stores of blessed food specifically for offering to travelers and guests, believing that such generous hospitality would ensure divine protection for their family. The medieval feast, whether a grand celebration in a noble's hall or a modest gathering in a peasant's cottage, was transformed into a complex ritual of supernatural significance. The arrangement of food, the order of serving, and even the seating of guests could influence the spiritual atmosphere of the gathering. Wealthy households employed food tasters, not only to detect poisons, but to identify dishes that might have been cursed or contaminated by malevolent magic. The host would often have the first bite of each dish blessed by a priest or would personally taste it first to demonstrate that it was free from supernatural corruption. Prayers were recited before meals, not merely as expressions of gratitude, but as protective incantations that would sanctify the food and shield all who consumed it from spiritual harm. Music and storytelling during medieval feasts served purposes beyond mere entertainment. The songs and tales shared during communal meals were carefully chosen to invoke positive spiritual energies and reinforce the protective bonds of community. Stories of saints and heroes, songs of divine providence, and miraculous deliverance all contributed to creating a spiritual atmosphere that was believed to bless both the food and those who consumed it. As the medieval period progressed and trade routes expanded, exotic spices and foods from distant lands brought with them new layers of supernatural significance. Cinnamon from the Far East was believed not only to enhance flavor, but also to possess powerful protective properties against plague and evil spirits. Black pepper, so valuable it was sometimes used as currency, was considered a potent defense against curses and was often sewn into small sachets and worn as amulets by those who could afford such luxury. Cloves were thought to enhance memory and protect against nightmares, making them popular additions to evening meals. Nutmeg was believed to bring prophetic dreams and ward off malevolent magic. Ginger was associated with vigor and protection, particularly against illnesses of the stomach and spirit. Each spice carried its own mythology and supernatural associations, adding another dimension to the already complex web of culinary beliefs that govern medieval kitchens. The preparation of healing foods and medicinal recipes represented perhaps the most elaborate intersection of culinary practice and supernatural belief. When a family member fell ill, the preparation of restorative foods became a sacred duty that required precise attention to both physical ingredients and spiritual protocols. Healing broths and tisanes were prepared with elaborate rituals, prayers recited at each stage of preparation, specific herbs added at astrologically determined moments, and the entire process conducted with the utmost spiritual care. The person preparing these healing foods often fasted or prayed before beginning their work, believing that their own spiritual state would influence the efficacy of the remedy. Some families would have these preparations blessed by a priest before administering them to the sick, while others relied on the inherited wisdom of village healers who possessed secret knowledge of both herbal properties and supernatural techniques. The vessels used for preparing and serving medicinal foods were often specially designated and blessed, used only for healing purposes to prevent any spiritual contamination that might reduce their effectiveness. Some families possessed ancient bowls or cups that had been passed down through generations, believed to have accumulated spiritual power over time and to enhance the healing properties of whatever they contained. As we continue our gentle exploration of these medieval beliefs, we see how every aspect of daily life, from the most mundane tasks to the most significant ceremonies, was infused with layers of spiritual meaning. The medieval kitchen was not merely a place where food was prepared, but a sacred space where the physical and spiritual realms intersected with every meal. These beliefs provided structure, meaning, and comfort in a world where uncertainty and danger were constant companions. The legacy of these medieval culinary superstitions can still be traced in many modern traditions and folk beliefs. The practice of blessing meals before eating, the use of specific herbs and spices for both flavor and supposed health benefits, and the elaborate rituals surrounding holiday cooking all echo the profound spiritual significance that medieval people attributed to food and its preparation. In an age where survival often depended on the success of the harvest and the preservation of food through long winters, These supernatural beliefs provided both practical guidance and spiritual comfort, weaving together the sacred and the mundane in the most fundamental human activity of nourishing body and soul. As you drift deeper into peaceful rest, perhaps you can appreciate how our ancestors transformed every meal into an opportunity for divine connection, every act of cooking into a sacred ritual, and every shared table into a communion of both earthly and spiritual significance. Sweet dreams, dear listener, and may your rest be as peaceful as a medieval evening by the hearth, where the fire's gentle glow and the comfort of shared bread created moments of perfect peace in an uncertain world. The medieval understanding of seasonal transitions extended beyond mere agricultural concerns into deeply spiritual territory. Each turning of the year was seen as a cosmic drama requiring human participation to ensure its proper unfolding. The equinoxes and solstices were not simply astronomical events, but moments when the fabric between worlds grew gossamer thin, requiring vigilance and celebration in equal measure. During the autumn equinox, when day and night stood in perfect balance, medieval families would perform rituals designed to maintain harmony in their own lives. Tables were set with equal portions of summer and winter foods, symbolically honoring both the abundance of harvest and the scarcity to come. Children were taught to stand on one foot at the precise moment of equinox, believing this would grant them balance and grace throughout the coming year. The concept of balance pervaded medieval spiritual understanding in ways both profound and practical. Just as the year required equilibrium between light and dark, warmth and cold, growth and dormancy, so too did human life require careful balancing of opposing forces. Work and rest, fasting and feasting, solitude and community all needed to be maintained in proper proportion to ensure both physical health and spiritual well-being. This belief in cosmic balance extended to the very arrangement of household spaces. Medieval homes, particularly those of families with means, were often organized according to principles that reflected the larger cosmic order. The hearth, representing fire and transformation, occupied the central position. Water sources were placed in opposition to create elemental balance. Windows faced specific directions to capture beneficial energies from sunrise or sunset. Even furniture placement carried supernatural significance. Beds positioned to align with the Earth's magnetic forces were believed to promote restful sleep and prophetic dreams. Tables placed at the intersection of invisible energy lines were thought to sanctify meals and strengthen family bonds. Chairs arranged in circular patterns during gatherings created protective boundaries that harmful spirits supposedly could not penetrate. The medieval understanding of color and light added another dimension to daily superstitions. Different hues carried distinct spiritual properties that influenced everything from clothing choices to interior decoration. White, the color of purity and divine light, was reserved for the most sacred occasions and required careful maintenance to preserve its symbolic power. Wearing white without proper spiritual preparation was considered presumptuous and potentially dangerous. Red, associated with blood, fire, and life force, offered protection against malevolent energies, but also attracted attention from the spirit world. Many medieval people wore small touches of red, a thread sewn into a hem, a ribbon hidden beneath outer garments as protective talismans. However, wearing excessive red was thought to invite unwanted supernatural scrutiny or inflame passions beyond proper control. Blue, the color of the heavens and the Virgin Mary's traditional garment, provided spiritual calm and protection against deception. Medieval mothers would often dress their children in blue garments, believing this divine color would shield them from lies, curses, and harmful illusions. Blue fabrics, particularly those dyed with expensive pigments, were treasured as much for their protective properties as their beauty. Green, the color of growing things and natural vitality, carried ambiguous associations. In spring and summer, green represented divine blessing and earthly abundance. But green worn during winter months was considered inauspicious, as it symbolized resistance to natural cycles and could attract the attention of woodland spirits. Displaced by the season's dormancy. Black, perhaps unsurprisingly, was viewed with deep suspicion. While clergy wore black robes sanctified by religious authority, ordinary people wearing black without proper justification risked association with mourning, death, or forbidden practices. Some medieval communities had actual regulations about who could wear black garments and under what circumstances, reflecting both social hierarchies and supernatural concerns. The interplay of light and shadow in medieval homes created additional layers of superstitious observance. Candles were not merely sources of illumination, but tools for managing spiritual energies. The number of candles lit, their placement throughout a room, and even the way they burned all carried divinatory significance. A candle flame that leaned toward someone was thought to indicate either blessing or warning directed at that individual. Flames that burned blue suggested the presence of spirits, while those that sputtered and smoked indicated troubled energies needing cleansing. Medieval people paid careful attention to shadows as well, understanding them not as mere absence of light, but as entities with their own significance. A person's shadow falling across consecrated objects was considered irreverent and potentially harmful to both the object and the shadow caster. Children were warned never to step on another person's shadow, as this was believed to drain their vital energies or create unwanted spiritual connections between them. The concept of spiritual contagion, the belief that supernatural properties could transfer from one object or person to another through contact, permeated medieval life. This understanding influenced everything from rules about who could touch sacred relics to elaborate protocols for handling items belonging to the sick or deceased. Clean and unclean were not merely physical states, but spiritual conditions that could spread invisibly, requiring constant vigilance. This belief manifested in countless daily practices. Families would maintain separate vessels for different purposes, never mixing implements used for sacred tasks with those employed in mundane work. A spoon used to feed a sick person would be cleansed with blessed water and sacred herbs before being returned to general use. Clothing worn during funerals required purification rituals before being worn again, lest the spiritual residue of death cling to the wearer and attract further misfortune. The medieval marketplace reflected these concerns about spiritual contagion in fascinating ways. Vendors selling blessed or purified goods, candles made with sanctified wax, bread baked according to holy protocols, herbs gathered during propitious lunar phases occupied privileged positions and commanded premium prices. Buyers would carefully examine not just the physical quality of goods, but also inquire about their spiritual provenance, asking detailed questions about how items had been prepared, stored, and transported. Money itself carried supernatural implications beyond its economic value. Coins that passed through many hands were thought to accumulate spiritual residue from their various owners, potentially carrying curses or blessings, depending on the moral character of those who had previously possessed them. Some merchants would ritually cleanse coins received in trade, passing them through sacred smoke or sprinkling them with blessed water before adding them to their strong boxes. Conversely, certain coins were believed to possess inherent protective power. Silver, associated with the moon and divine feminine energy, was preferred not only for its material value, but for its supposed ability to ward off harmful magic. Gold, linked to the sun and divine masculine power, was thought to attract prosperity and divine favor. Copper, though less valuable, was believed to have healing properties and was sometimes worn as jewelry. specifically for its supernatural, rather than decorative qualities. The giving and receiving of gifts in medieval society involved elaborate, supernatural considerations. Gifts were never mere objects, but carried the intentions, energies, and even partial essence of the giver. Accepting a gift created spiritual bonds and obligations that extended far beyond simple gratitude. This understanding made the exchange of gifts a serious matter requiring careful thought about both immediate and long-term implications. Certain gifts were considered particularly auspicious. Bread and salt, representing sustenance and purification, were traditional housewarming gifts believed to bless new dwellings and protect their inhabitants. Herbs and flowers chosen for their protective properties served as gifts that conveyed both affection and supernatural guardianship. Handcrafted items, especially those made with prayer and positive intention during their creation, were treasured as vessels of concentrated beneficial energy. Other gifts, however, carried warnings and required cautious handling. Sharp objects like knives or scissors were believed to sever relationships if given without proper ritual compensation. Typically, the recipient would offer a coin in return, symbolically purchasing the item rather than accepting it as a gift. This practice transformed a potentially harmful exchange into a safe transaction, maintaining spiritual balance between giver and receiver. The medieval understanding of numbers extended into every aspect of gift-giving and exchange. Giving items in sets of 3 invoked divine protection through Trinity symbolism. 7 of anything was considered powerfully blessed. 13 of any object was avoided with almost superstitious dread, while 12 represented cosmic completion and was highly favorable. Even quantities like bread loaves, candles, or coins were carefully counted to ensure numerological harmony with spiritual principles. As twilight deepens and you drift closer to peaceful slumber. Imagine the medieval household settling into evening routines shaped by these countless beliefs and practices. Picture Elizabeth, our baker's wife, banking the hearth fire for the night, murmuring protective prayers as she covers the coals that will smolder until morning. See her checking that all thresholds are properly sealed with salt, all mirrors covered, all iron talismans in their proper places. Hear the distant bells marking Compline, their sacred tones rippling across darkened villages and through shadowed forests, creating invisible shields of sound against the night's dangers. Sense the collective exhalation as communities settle into sleep, surrounded by their carefully constructed networks of supernatural protection, trusting in the efficacy of rituals performed and prayers recited. The medieval world, for all its hardships and uncertainties, possessed a coherence and meaningfulness that our modern age sometimes struggles to replicate. Every object had significance, every action carried weight, every moment offered opportunity for connection with forces greater than individual human existence. In understanding these beliefs, we glimpse not merely historical curiosity, but timeless human yearning for purpose, protection, and participation in cosmic meaning. Rest now. Dear listener, cradled by the knowledge that our ancestors faced their fears with faith, met uncertainty with ritual, and found in their supernatural beliefs both comfort and courage to face another day, may their resilient spirits inspire peaceful dreams and gentle rest.